Tense silence spread across the tarmac at Monroe International Airport as an argument erupted between a pilot and an unsuspecting passenger. A black man, dressed sharply, clutching an elegant leather briefcase, standing beside a sleek private jet. Onlookers turned their heads, straining to catch a glimpse of the confrontation. Whispers rippled through the airport staff as the pilot, red-faced and fuming, waved his arms, his voice rising with each word. "You don't belong on this aircraft," he barked, his tone laced with frustration. Little did he know that the man he was trying to cast off owned not only the jet, but the entire airline. Before we dive deeper, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an incredible story like this. If you enjoy these kinds of inspiring real-life tales, let us know. Press 1 if you're loving it, 0 if you're not. Your feedback helps us bring you more of the content you love. The day had started like any other at Monroe International Airport, one of the world's busiest travel hubs. Airplanes lined the runways, taxiing in and out in a seamless rhythm. Their engines roared in a steady pulse, a soundtrack to the never-ending flow of travelers and ground staff. Workers in neon vests directed aircraft, while inside the terminals, passengers hurried through security checkpoints, dragging luggage, making last-minute phone calls, checking departure screens. Among the ocean of travelers, one man stood out. His name was Jordan Gaines. Tall, composed, with deep brown eyes and a quiet confidence that made people take notice. But Jordan's schedule that afternoon was far from ordinary. Years of relentless work, bold business moves, and sleepless nights had brought him to this moment, the pinnacle of success. He wasn't just flying private today. He owned the jet. And beyond that, he was now the majority shareholder of an entire airline, Horizon Aero. It wasn't widely known yet. The official announcements were still weeks away, and only a select few within the company were aware of the transition. But Jordan was the man behind the growing airline's future. Horizon Aero had made a name for itself as a boutique airline, offering a mix of high-end private charters and premium commercial flights. While it wasn't as massive as the industry's biggest giants, it had earned respect for its impeccable safety record and exceptional onboard service. With headquarters in Atlanta, it was quickly expanding across the country, gaining traction among business elites and high-profile travelers. That morning, Jordan was headed to New York for a crucial series of meetings, discussions that would shape Horizon Aero's future growth strategy for the coming year. Because he needed privacy to finalize last-minute details, he had arranged to fly on one of Horizon Aero's newest and most advanced jets, the Gulfstream G700. The aircraft was the pride of the fleet, featuring sumptuous leather seats, cutting-edge technology, and a luxurious cabin designed for ultimate comfort. Yet very few people within Horizon Aero knew that Jordan was now the company's majority owner. The executive board had yet to make the transition public, and even most employees were unaware of the change. As he approached the private tarmac, Jordan deliberately chose not to pass through the VIP lounges. Instead, he walked through the main terminal, blending in with everyday travelers. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, minus a tie, he exuded quiet authority without demanding attention. His leather briefcase held his laptop and stacks of acquisition paperwork, the result of months of careful negotiations. He moved at a steady pace, the massive airport windows to his left revealing a constant stream of planes taking off and landing. A wave of pride swelled within him. As a child, he had been fascinated by the roar of airplanes overhead, dreaming not just of flying, but of shaping the experience of flight itself. Today, that dream was real. Jordan glanced at his phone. Still a few minutes before he was scheduled to board. The pilot assigned to the flight had texted him earlier, confirming that everything was ready. Jordan had never met him before. Horizon Aero's rotation system often placed him with different crew members, and he didn't mind. In fact, he preferred it that way. It gave him a chance to meet his employees firsthand, understand their perspectives, and learn from the ground up. Outside, the sky was thick with clouds, the distant rumble of thunder hinting at possible delays later in the day. As Jordan approached a discreet entrance near Gate 42, a ground officer checked the special clearance code on his ID and gave him a polite nod, waving him forward. But just as he stepped onto the tarmac, Heading toward his sleek Gulfstream G700, he noticed something unusual. A heated discussion was unfolding near the jet's stairs. A uniformed pilot stood with his arms crossed, his expression rigid as he argued with a group of ground staff. Jordan's steps slowed. His sharp instincts told him something was off. The pilot's name tag read Captain Edward Grayson. His posture was authoritative, shoulders squared, chin lifted in a stance of dominance. His voice carried across the tarmac. "No one else is allowed on this aircraft except the designated VIP and me. Who is that guy walking toward us?" The ground staff hesitated, their gazes flickering toward Jordan, then back to the agitated pilot. Jordan took another step forward, his heart sinking slightly. He had a feeling he knew exactly what was about to happen. The bright sunlight reflected off the polished silver exterior of the Horizon Aero Gulfstream G700, the company's newest pride. But as Jordan Gaines approached his aircraft, an unexpected sight made him slow his steps. At the foot of the jet's stairs, a commotion was brewing. A uniformed pilot, his stance rigid with authority, was gesturing aggressively at a group of ground staff, his frustration clear in the sharp movements of his hands. Jordan caught snippets of the exchange. "No one steps on this plane unless I approve it," the pilot's voice carried across the tarmac. "This flight is for a high-priority passenger. Who is that man just walking up like he owns the place?" Jordan immediately understood who the argument was about. The pilot's name tag read Captain Edward Grayson. The ground crew exchanged uncertain glances, clearly trying to explain something to Grayson. But he wasn't having it. His face darkened further when he spotted Jordan. Within seconds, the captain turned his full attention to him, his expression twisting from annoyance to outright hostility. "You! Stop right there," Grayson barked, stepping forward as if to physically block his path. "This is a private flight. Who gave you clearance to be here?" Jordan took a steady breath, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. He had encountered situations like this before, though rarely so blatant. Still, he had neither the time nor the patience for unnecessary drama today. "I have full authorization, Captain," he replied, his voice even. "My name is—" "Authorization from whom?" Grayson cut him off, arms crossed over his chest. "This isn't how it works," he continued, his tone laced with disbelief. "You don't just stroll onto a restricted area because you know someone. This is a high-security corporate flight, so unless you want security involved, I suggest you move along." A brief silence fell. Jordan felt a flicker of irritation, not just at the accusation, but at the disrespect behind it. The ground staff remained frozen, their gazes darting between Jordan and the captain. He could sense their unease, their silent recognition of the truth, but none of them dared contradict Grayson. The wind picked up slightly, ruffling Jordan's suit jacket as he considered how to handle the situation. He had more important matters to deal with than arguing with an uninformed pilot. And yet, something told him this was about more than just a misunderstanding. Jordan stepped forward with a composed demeanor. His hands relaxed at his sides. "Captain Grayson," he said, keeping his voice calm, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I am scheduled to fly on this aircraft today. If you'd like, I can show you my identification." Grayson's eyes flickered with something unreadable as he scanned Jordan's tailored suit and expensive briefcase. There was no reason for skepticism, except, perhaps, one. Jordan had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had already decided he didn't belong. "Go ahead," Grayson said, his tone mocking as he folded his arms. "Show me whatever ID you want, but it won't change the fact that I don't recognize you." Jordan resisted the urge to sigh as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his official Horizon Aero identification card. It was clear, professional, and stamped with top-level clearance codes. But there was one small problem. Nowhere on the ID did it explicitly say majority shareholder. The company's rebranding documents were still being finalized, and as a result, his role was simply listed as senior executive. Jordan knew exactly how this would play out. Grayson snatched the ID from his hand, barely glancing at it before shoving it back. "Where did you get this?" he scoffed. "I've never heard of a senior executive traveling alone without an entourage. This has to be some sort of forgery." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he refused to let his expression shift. "With all due respect, Captain," he said, If you have concerns, I suggest you verify my credentials rather than jump to conclusions. Grayson let out a dry laugh. Look, I don't care who you claim to be. You're not stepping foot on this plane. This flight is reserved for an important man, and I have orders to keep it secure. A tense silence followed. Jordan could feel the weight of the moment. The disbelief, the dismissiveness, the clear, unspoken implication. This man doesn't believe I could possibly be the passenger. Not because of what Jordan was wearing, not because of how he carried himself, but because of who he was. Jordan had faced this before. Sometimes it was subtle, a skeptical glance, an unnecessary double-check of credentials, and sometimes, like today, it was undeniably direct. But he had never allowed ignorance to derail his plans before, and he wasn't about to start now. As the tension thickened, a voice hesitantly cut through the silence. Captain. A young flight attendant emerged from behind one of the carts, her wide eyes full of nerves. Her name tag read Emily Lawson. Jordan noticed her grip tighten around the clipboard she held, as if steadying herself for what she was about to say. I believe this man is the passenger we've been expecting, she said carefully. I received a manifest earlier, and his name was listed. Stay out of this, Grayson snapped, not even sparing her a glance. If you know what's good for you, you'll remember your place. Emily flinched at the harshness of his tone, her face paling slightly. Jordan's stomach twisted. He wasn't just seeing prejudice now, he was seeing fear. Fear from employees who knew the truth but were afraid to speak it. And in that moment, he knew. This wasn't just about getting on his plane anymore. This was about something bigger. This was about setting a precedent. Jordan inhaled deeply, centering himself. He had two choices. He could walk away, find another way to deal with this quietly. Or he could face this head-on and send a message that could change Horizon Aero forever. His decision was made. Emily Lawson's shoulders tensed as she clutched her clipboard to her chest, her fingers gripping the edges tightly. She cast a nervous glance between Captain Grayson and Jordan Gaines, her lips slightly parted as if debating whether to speak again. Jordan could see it in her eyes, fear, uncertainty, but also a quiet determination. But before she could say anything else, the distant hum of an approaching vehicle drew everyone's attention. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulled onto the tarmac, rolling to a smooth stop nearby. The back door swung open, and Daniel Whitmore, a senior executive at Horizon Aero, stepped out. He was one of the few people in the company who knew the truth, that Jordan wasn't just a VIP passenger today. He owned the entire airline. Whitmore had been planning to board alongside Jordan for their business trip to New York, but as soon as he saw the tense standoff unfolding before him, his expression darkened. His sharp blue eyes flicked between the captain and Jordan, sensing immediately that something was wrong. What the hell is happening? Whitmore demanded as he strode toward them, his voice cutting through the thick tension like a blade. He came to stand protectively beside Jordan, his presence alone shifting the energy of the confrontation. Captain Grayson, Whitmore said, his tone firm but measured. This is Jordan Gaines. He is the passenger we've been waiting for. But Grayson only narrowed his eyes, his hostility unwavering. I don't know who you are either, he shot back. But if you're trying to push the same ridiculous story, you both need to leave. I'm not taking off until the real passenger arrives. Whitmore's jaw clenched, and he exchanged a quick glance with Jordan, a silent conversation passing between them. Jordan knew exactly what was happening. Grayson wasn't just being difficult, he was refusing to believe the truth. If it had been any other executive, someone who fit the expected image of a corporate leader, Grayson likely wouldn't have questioned it. Jordan could see it in the way the captain's gaze held an unmistakable challenge, as if daring him to keep up what he believed was a farce. For a brief moment, Jordan considered handling this discreetly. He could make a single phone call, arrange a different pilot, and fire Grayson quietly later. But then, what? What would that say to every employee in this company who had been forced to deal with bias and discrimination in silence? What kind of leader would he be if he turned away, let this moment pass, and allowed someone like Grayson to remain in a position of power? No. This wasn't just about getting on the plane. This was about setting a standard for Horizon Aero. Jordan straightened his posture and turned to the nearest ground crew member. "Who's the lead supervisor here?" he asked, his voice steady. A woman hesitated before stepping forward. "That would be me, sir," she said cautiously. "Good. Get me Monroe Airport's central operations on the line," Jordan instructed. "I have a direct contact with Rebecca Langley, the senior coordinator. We'll sort this out properly." The supervisor nodded and hurried off to make the call. But before she could get far, Grayson let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "I see what you're trying to do," he sneered. "Pull some strings, call in a favor, but that's not how this works." He took a step closer, his expression hardening. "You either leave voluntarily, or I'll call security myself." The malice in Grayson's voice was undeniable now. Jordan could practically taste the bitterness in the air. Whitmore took a deliberate step forward, his voice edged with warning. "Captain, you are dangerously close to throwing your entire career away. You have no idea who you're talking to." But Grayson had passed the point of reason. His face flushed red with frustration, and his voice rose as he cut Whitmore off. "Don't you dare threaten me," he snapped. "I am the pilot in command here. I say who flies and who doesn't. And if you keep pushing, I'll do more than call security. I'll have you both banned from this entire airport. Do you understand me?" A hush fell over the tarmac. Several employees had gathered nearby, their faces tense as they watched the scene unfold. Jordan could feel dozens of eyes on him now. Random travelers had stopped in their tracks. Some were already pulling out their phones, capturing the moment. He exhaled slowly, the weight of it all pressing down on him. This could spiral into a PR disaster, and yet this was exactly why he needed to take a stand. If he let this slide, what kind of message would it send? That someone like Captain Grayson could treat people this way and still represent Horizon Aero? Absolutely not. Jordan took a step forward, standing tall and unwavering. "All right, Captain," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "If that's your final answer, if you refuse to fly me because you don't believe I'm the real passenger, then get ready to hear the truth." His words hung in the air like a storm about to break. For the first time, Grayson hesitated. His scowl wavered just slightly. Something in Jordan's tone unsettled him, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He threw his arms out, his arrogance still intact. "Oh, I'm thrilled to hear this so-called truth," he mocked. "Go on, enlighten me." Jordan locked eyes with him, his patience wearing thin. At that moment, Grayson had no idea how drastically his world was about to shift. If only he knew that the man he had spent the last 10 minutes insulting, dismissing, and trying to remove was about to become his ultimate authority. The tarmac had fallen completely silent now. Everyone was waiting, watching, holding their breath. Because what came next would be a reckoning, and Captain Grayson would never forget it. Just as Jordan Gaines was about to respond, the distant hum of an approaching golf cart cut through the tense silence. The vehicle screeched to a halt nearby, and out stepped a tall, no-nonsense security officer. Her short-cropped hair framed a face that radiated authority and precision. Her badge read, Sergeant Valerie Monroe. She took a moment to survey the scene. A rigid and visibly agitated pilot, a composed but firm executive standing his ground. A cluster of uneasy ground crew and flight attendants caught in the middle of the dispute. And a corporate executive, Daniel Whitmore, looking both concerned and exasperated. Walking forward with measured steps, Sergeant Monroe let her gaze settle on the pilot first. "I received a complaint about a disturbance here," she announced in a neutral but firm tone. "Would someone like to explain what's going on?" Captain Edward Grayson wasted no time. His hand shot out, finger jabbing toward Jordan. "Yes, officer, this man is trespassing on my aircraft," he barked. "I have repeatedly ordered him to leave, but he refuses. He's impersonating a Horizon Aero executive, and I need him removed immediately so we can take off." A tense pause followed. Sergeant Monroe's eyes flickered toward Jordan. "Sir, may I see your identification?" she asked, her voice professional but noticeably calmer than Grayson's. Without hesitation, Jordan retrieved his official Horizon Aero ID and handed it to her. She examined it carefully, then pulled out a small handheld device to cross-reference it against the airport's internal system. Her expression shifted slightly as she murmured, After a few seconds, she looked back up. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "this identification appears to be legitimate. Are you indeed traveling under official Horizon Aero business today?" Jordan nodded, his voice measured. Yes, Sergeant. In fact, But before he could finish, Grayson cut him off. It's forged, the pilot declared loudly. I told you, he can't even name the board members or sponsors. He's lying. Whitmore, who had been holding back until now, let out an exasperated sigh. Captain, are you serious? He asked, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. I can personally vouch for. Quiet, Grayson snapped, turning toward Whitmore with open hostility. I don't care who you claim to be. This flight is under my authority, and I say he's not coming on board. Sergeant Monroe studied Grayson carefully now. Her trained instincts told her there was more to this story than a simple security mix-up. She glanced over at the ground crew. Does anyone here have information on who is authorized for this flight? A nervous shuffling followed. Then, hesitantly, Emily Lawson, the young flight attendant, stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she held up her clipboard. Ma'am, I have the official flight manifest, she said, her voice wavering but steady. It lists a Mr. Jordan Gaines plus up to 3 guests. He is the lead passenger. A tense silence settled over the group. Grayson whipped around to face Emily, his eyes flashing dangerously. You have got to be joking, he growled. This is some kind of mistake. But before he could continue, Sergeant Monroe lifted a hand, cutting him off. Let her finish, she instructed, her voice carrying a weight of authority that silenced the pilot. Emily, clearly relieved, handed over the clipboard. Monroe took her time, cross-referencing the flight details, date, and security clearances. After a few seconds, she gave a firm nod. Then, turning to Grayson, she said, Captain, the manifest does indeed list Mr. Gaines as the authorized lead passenger for this flight. A muscle twitched in Grayson's jaw. His hands balled into fists. That can't be right, he muttered, shaking his head. I was told we were flying someone from the corporate board. I've never heard the name Gaines. This has to be some kind of hack or system error. Jordan raised an eyebrow, his voice carrying an edge of controlled disbelief. A hack? He repeated. You think someone went through the trouble of forging an entire flight itinerary, corporate ID, and security clearance, just to steal a ride to New York? Sergeant Monroe exhaled, clearly seeing the tension escalating. Let's handle this logically, she said. Captain, would you be willing to contact Horizon Aero headquarters to verify the passenger details? If your point of contact states that Mr. Gaines is not authorized, then we'll proceed accordingly. It was a reasonable, rational solution. But Grayson's face darkened further. He had gone too far in his denial to backpedal now. I don't have time for that, he snapped. I'm not calling anyone. My pre-flight briefing listed a different name, and that's final. Jordan exchanged a glance with Whitmore, who looked completely dumbfounded by the pilot's stubbornness. It was entirely possible that Grayson had received an outdated flight log. Perhaps a corporate liaison's name had been on the file before Jordan's clearance was fully updated. But that didn't excuse the blatant hostility. Sergeant Monroe's gaze sharpened as she took in the full picture. Something about Grayson's refusal to verify the information, his aggressive insistence that Jordan was lying, and his immediate reaction to dismissing a black man as a legitimate executive, it all added up to something ugly. She let out a slow breath. Captain Grayson, she said, would you prefer to delay this flight until we resolve this through official channels? At this rate, no one was taking off any time soon. Grayson huffed, folding his arms. I'd rather take off without these stowaways, he muttered. They can argue all they want from outside the airport. That was the final straw. Jordan had held his patience long enough. He took a step forward, his voice unwavering and commanding. If that's your final answer, he said, then it's time you hear the truth. A hush fell over the tarmac. Grayson's scowl wavered, just for a fraction of a second. Something in Jordan's tone unsettled him, but he was too far gone in his arrogance to stop now. He threw his arms out and barked, Oh, I'd love to hear this. Go ahead, tell me your so-called truth. A dangerous smirk tugged at the corners of Jordan's lips. He was about to shatter Grayson's entire reality. A hush settled over the tarmac. For the first time since the confrontation began, Jordan Gaines let his voice rise, not in anger, but in undeniable authority. I wasn't planning to do this publicly, but let me make something clear, he said, his tone steady, commanding. I am not just a passenger. I am the new majority shareholder of Horizon Aero. A stunned silence followed. The ground crew exchanged wide-eyed glances. Emily Lawson's lips parted in shock, while Daniel Whitmore let out a silent exhale, as if relieved the truth was finally out. Sergeant Valerie Monroe narrowed her gaze, her sharp instincts assessing Jordan's claim. Was this a bluff? A power move? But there was something about Jordan's stance, the absolute certainty in his voice, that suggested he wasn't exaggerating. And then there was Captain Edward Grayson. For the first time, he hesitated. His entire body went rigid, his once arrogant smirk faltering. Then, a short, incredulous laugh escaped his lips. "You? Owner of an airline," he scoffed, shaking his head. "You can't be serious." His disbelief was written all over his face. "Why would the new owner of a multi-million-dollar airline show up alone?" he continued, his voice laced with mockery. "No entourage, no security detail? Just walking across the tarmac like any regular passenger?" Jordan's expression remained measured and composed. "Because I believe in knowing my company from the ground up," he replied coolly. "Not from an ivory tower." Grayson's jaw tightened. "I don't need an army around me to prove my worth, Captain, but I do need to know whether you're going to let me board peacefully or if I have to make a call that will change the course of your career." The pilot's complexion shifted, a strange mix of pale and flushed. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the weight of the situation, because if Jordan was telling the truth, then this wasn't just a heated argument. This was a disaster. Grayson shook his head furiously, grasping at the last remnants of control. "You're lying." But his voice had lost some of its earlier fire. "I won't be intimidated by some ridiculous story." Jordan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "All right then." He pulled out his phone and unlocked it with a single press. Behind him, Daniel Whitmore did the same, tapping through his corporate emails. "I didn't want to have to do this," Jordan said, "but if proof is what you need, here it is." He turned his phone screen toward them. The subject line flashed across the display in bold letters. "Final confirmation, majority share transfer to Mr. Jordan Gaines." The email was from Laura Mendelsohn, the acting CEO of Horizon Aero. Attached was a PDF of the signed agreement, featuring official letterheads, date stamps, and executive signatures. Every legal document confirming his ownership was right there, illuminated in cold, hard reality. Sergeant Monroe took the phone, her brows knitting together as she carefully examined the documents. She pulled up the airline's database, cross-referencing the official domain. Her face visibly stiffened. After a long beat, she handed the phone back with careful precision. Then, turning to Grayson, she said, "Captain, it appears Mr. Gaines is telling the truth." The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp rippled through the crew and airport staff. Emily Lawson covered her mouth with her hands. Whitmore remained motionless, watching Grayson closely. But the pilot, Grayson himself, looked like the ground had been pulled from under him. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, his fingers twitching as if searching for something to latch onto. He turned toward Jordan, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. It was too late. Grayson knew the implications of what he had just done. If Jordan was really the airline's new majority shareholder, then everything Grayson had said, the orders he had barked, the disrespect he had shown, would cost him everything. The captain's face twisted, his pride warring with the sinking realization that he had made the biggest mistake of his career. But instead of accepting reality, he did what desperate men always do. He doubled down. "This can't be real," he muttered, shaking his head. "Someone tampered with the system." Jordan's lips parted in stunned disbelief. "Are you serious?" Grayson clenched his fists, still resisting. "No one told me about this. No one briefed me. I should have been informed." "And what?" Jordan cut in, his voice edged with cold finality. "Would that have changed the way you treated me today?" Grayson went completely still. Jordan took a slow step forward. "Would you have treated me with respect if I had looked different?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Grayson's face burned with shame, but his pride was too rigid to let him admit it. "This flight isn't happening," he muttered instead. "I refuse to fly under these circumstances." And just like that, he sealed his own fate. Jordan turned to Sergeant Monroe, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant," he said, "would you be so kind as to escort Captain Grayson off my tarmac?" For a moment, Grayson looked ready to argue. But then his gaze flicked past Jordan, toward the crowd of onlookers. to the phones recording everything, to the crew watching in silent judgment, and suddenly it hit him. This moment would follow him forever. His career wasn't just at risk. It was over. Sergeant Monroe gave a brief nod before turning toward Grayson. "Captain, I suggest you come with me." Grayson's breath was shallow, his hands clenched, but with nothing left to fight for, he let his arms fall to his sides. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The entire tarmac remained eerily silent as they watched him go. Jordan inhaled deeply, then exhaled, releasing the weight of the last half hour. He turned to the staff, his voice calm but authoritative. "Let's find a new pilot," he said simply. "We have a flight to New York to catch." And with that, the moment that would forever change Horizon Aero had come to an end. The hush that fell over the tarmac was so absolute, it was as if the entire airport had frozen in time. Even the distant beeping of a reversing fuel truck sounded muted, drowned out by the weight of what had just happened. Captain Edward Grayson's face had gone rigid, his once authoritative stance now unsteady, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Emily Lawson let out a relieved breath, a small smile flickering across her lips. Daniel Whitmore, standing beside Jordan, gave the slightest sigh, as if thinking, "Finally, we can put an end to this disaster." But then, Grayson shattered any hope of a peaceful resolution. "This can't be," he hissed, his voice tight with desperation. "He's black. I mean, there's no way." Gasps rippled through the gathered staff. Even those who had chosen to ignore the tension before could no longer pretend this wasn't happening. Grayson had just voiced the prejudice that had been fueling his disbelief all along. The unspoken bias that had driven him to challenge Jordan's identity, to ignore every piece of evidence placed before him, to refuse to even entertain the possibility that Jordan could be in charge. Sergeant Valerie Monroe's expression darkened. She took a deliberate step forward, her voice firm. "Captain Grayson," she said, "I understand that this situation has caught you off guard, but your statement is completely out of line. I strongly suggest you let Mr. Gaines board his plane." Grayson's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, it seemed as though he was beginning to grasp just how far he had gone. The arrogance, the dismissal, the outright bigotry, it had all played out in front of an audience that would not forget what they had witnessed. His career was dangling by a thread. Like a man grasping at straws, Grayson turned back to Jordan, his voice harsh, his pride unwilling to let go. "If you really are the majority shareholder," he demanded, "then prove it. Call corporate. Let me hear it from them directly." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he kept his emotions in check. He didn't enjoy humiliating people. That wasn't his style. But this was beyond reason. "All right, Captain," Jordan said, pulling out his phone, "but be prepared for the consequences." With a quick tap, he dialed Laura Mendelson, the acting CEO of Horizon Aero. The line rang once, twice, before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Laura Mendelson speaking." Jordan's tone remained even, though there was an edge of finality to it. "Laura, it's Jordan. I'm here on the tarmac with one of our pilots, Captain Edward Grayson. We have an issue. He refuses to believe I'm the majority shareholder and is actively preventing me from boarding my own aircraft." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in before adding, "Would you like to speak with him?" Without waiting for an answer, he extended the phone toward Grayson. The pilot's face had gone pale, his fingers trembling slightly as he took the device. "Hello," he said into the receiver, his voice suddenly lacking its former confidence. "Is this Laura Mendelson from Horizon Aero?" There was a brief pause before her voice carried through the speaker, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Yes, it is. And you are speaking with your new boss, Captain." Grayson's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. I didn't realize." "No," Laura interrupted, her voice sharp. "You didn't, and I strongly suggest you rectify this situation immediately." A few more muffled words passed between them, but it was clear the conversation was over. When Grayson returned the phone, he couldn't meet Jordan's gaze. His bravado had completely crumbled. The mighty, unyielding Captain Edward Grayson had just shrunk before everyone's eyes. The hush lingered. The security officers, the flight attendants, the ground staff, they were all waiting for what came next. They all knew an apology was expected, but Grayson couldn't seem to find the words. So finally, Jordan broke the silence. "Captain," he said, his voice level, I appreciate your concern for security. However, your refusal to verify my identity, your blatant disrespect, and your comments about my race are unacceptable. Grayson's throat tightened. I didn't mean. No, Jordan cut in, his gaze unwavering. You didn't know who I was. But that does not excuse your behavior. I'm not sure you understand the gravity of the situation. The pilot's eyes darted around, searching for some kind of escape. Perhaps, for the first time, he noticed the onlookers still filming. Perhaps he realized this wasn't just an embarrassing moment, it was a public disaster. A career-ending one. One of the security officers cleared his throat. Do we consider this matter resolved, or do we need to escort the pilot away for further questioning? Grayson's head snapped up at that. Sergeant Monroe stood ready to pass judgment. But she waited, because this decision wasn't hers to make. This was Jordan's flight. This was Jordan's company. And Grayson had insulted Jordan personally. The weight of the decision pressed on Jordan's shoulders. Should he fire Grayson on the spot, or should he allow him to continue the flight, knowing full well the damage had already been done? Jordan inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Daniel Whitmore gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Your call, Mr. Gaines, he murmured. You have every right to do whatever you decide. Jordan's fingers curled into a fist at his side. This wasn't just about one pilot's actions. This was about setting a standard for what Horizon Aero stood for, and whatever decision he made next, it would set a precedent. Captain Edward Grayson's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. A single bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he locked eyes with Jordan Gaines, as though silently begging for mercy. For the first time in his career, he was powerless, and Jordan held the final say in his fate. The weight of the decision pressed against Jordan's mind. Was it justice to strip Grayson of his position immediately? Or would it be revenge? Jordan's voice was measured, calm but unyielding. Captain Grayson, I will not stand here and allow you to fly this plane after your blatant display of insubordination and bigotry. His words were final, as if sealing Grayson's fate in stone. Consider yourself grounded, Jordan continued. You can go speak with Laura Mendelsohn and the rest of the board about your future with Horizon Aero. Grayson exhaled raggedly, his shoulders sagging as if a heavy weight had just collapsed upon him. For a moment, it looked like he might protest, but Jordan's unwavering expression snuffed out that idea before it could form. Without another word, Grayson turned, his steps heavy, his eyes fixed on the ground. His career was unraveling with every step he took toward the terminal. A hushed stillness clung to the air, even as he disappeared into the airport. Some of the ground crew stood frozen, uncertain whether to follow protocol or simply process what had just happened. Emily Lawson let out a quiet, shaky breath, a hint of relief breaking through the tension. Daniel Whitmore took a long exhale, running a hand down his face before muttering, "Well, that was something." Sergeant Valerie Monroe turned to Jordan, her tone careful, measured. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "I'm truly sorry you had to go through this. If you need a formal statement from airport police or wish to file an official complaint, we stand ready." Jordan nodded, his tone gentler now. "I appreciate that, Sergeant. I'll speak with Laura Mendelsohn, and someone from our legal department may reach out. But for now, I need a replacement pilot. There's important business waiting in New York." Monroe gave a small nod. "Understood. I'll assist in any way I can." With a respectful incline of her head, she signaled her fellow officers to disperse. Jordan turned back toward the sleek silver Horizon Aero jet, his posture still poised with dignity, despite the emotional toll of the confrontation. Whitmore stood beside him, shaking his head. "Jordan, I'm really sorry about all this. I had no idea Grayson would." Jordan lifted a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "This isn't on you, Daniel," he said, his voice firm. "The blame is fully on him and whatever prejudices he carries. Let's move forward. We need a new captain, but the plane is ready. Let's get on with our flight." Jordan was about to step aboard when Emily hesitated, then stepped forward. Her cheeks were flushed, her fingers twisting the edge of her clipboard. "Mr. Gaines," she said softly, I hope you don't hold this against Horizon Aero. We're proud to have you as our new owner. Most of us are thrilled, truly." Jordan's expression softened, and he gave her a warm, reassuring smile. "Thank you, Emily. I don't hold the company responsible for one man's ignorance, but I won't tolerate it either." His gaze swept across the remaining staff. Everyone here should feel safe and respected. That will be our standard moving forward. Emily nodded vigorously, relief evident in her eyes. With that, the ground staff began coordinating a standby captain, a senior pilot from the lounge who could take over at a moment's notice. Even as Jordan boarded the aircraft, the weight of the confrontation still lingered. Some onlookers had already dispersed, but whispers rippled through the airport, traveling faster than the departing flights. They recounted every detail: the pilot's blatant defiance, the shocking revelation, the swift downfall. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. Word would reach corporate offices, board members would demand explanations, and Captain Grayson would soon face a disciplinary hearing, one that could end his career. But Jordan knew that his real challenges were only beginning. He had asserted his rightful position today, but not everyone in the aviation industry would welcome him with open arms. The skies above weren't just for flying. They were about to become a battleground. For now, though, justice had been served. And as Jordan stepped aboard the aircraft he owned, a quiet determination bloomed within him. Horizon Aero will stand for respect, excellence, and unity, not discrimination. The cabin of the Gulfstream G650 was a sanctuary of quiet luxury. Plush, cream-colored leather seats lined the interior, accented by polished wood trim. Soft, hidden LED lights cast a warm glow. At the rear, a private lounge area with an extendable workspace offered a perfect retreat. It was everything Jordan had envisioned, a perfect balance of functionality and elegance. And yet, he had never imagined that his first official flight as owner would be so fraught with tension. As he stepped inside, the weight of the confrontation still clung to him. He sank into one of the seats near a panoramic window, his gaze drifting toward the runway where Captain Grayson had sealed his fate. His reflection stared back at him, his eyes still flickering with residual anger and frustration. In his peripheral vision, Emily and another flight attendant moved through the cabin, performing final checks. Whitmore approached and settled into the seat opposite Jordan, exhaling audibly. Never in my wildest dreams did I think we'd see something like that. Jordan let out a slow breath, his gaze still fixed outside. Neither did I. Jordan Gaines sat silently, his eyes distant. I've faced racism before, Daniel. His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it. But rarely so blatant, especially in a corporate environment. Whitmore said nothing, sensing the depth of Jordan's thoughts. Jordan exhaled, shaking his head slightly. Sometimes it's subtle. The looks, the condescending tones, the extra scrutiny. But this was different. A beat of silence passed between them. Then, Jordan refocused. He straightened his posture and asked, "How soon can we get another pilot? I need to make that meeting in New York." Whitmore glanced at his phone. "The standby pilot should be here in about 15 minutes, he said. Captain Mark Sims. Experienced, well-respected. He was on a layover in the pilot's lounge, so we got lucky." Jordan nodded, appreciating the swift resolution. "Good. We'll have a slightly delayed takeoff, but I can still handle my obligations once we're airborne. I'll send an apology to the board members in Manhattan." Just then, Emily Lawson approached, holding a digital tablet. "Mr. Gaines, I've taken care of the catering requests," she reported. "I also have the flight plan here if you'd like to review it." Jordan offered her a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Emily. Yes, let me take a look." He scanned through the flight path displayed on the screen. Aside from the slight delay from the fiasco, everything was in order. Nothing that would disrupt their arrival too drastically. "This looks fine. Thank you." She nodded and withdrew, leaving Jordan and Whitmore in a momentary pocket of calm. Outside, a fuel truck rumbled into position, topping off the jet's reserves. Overhead, the sky had thickened with clouds, hinting at possible storm conditions later in the day. The soft hum of the plane's auxiliary power unit filled the background. Then, Jordan's phone buzzed. "Laura Mendelson." Taking a breath, he answered. "Laura, thanks for patching things up earlier." The moment he spoke, she launched into an apology. Her voice quavered with frustration. "Jordan, I had no idea we had someone like that on staff. I'm mortified." Jordan could almost hear her pacing on the other end of the line. "I've already alerted HR, and we're initiating an immediate investigation. Are you all right?" Jordan leaned back in his seat, sighing. "I'm fine. It was ugly, but we're moving forward. Captain Grayson has been removed from the flight. I assume HR will be reaching out to him for a formal hearing soon? Laura's voice softened slightly. Yes, and I can't tell you how upset I am that this incident overshadowed your first flight as Horizon Aero's owner. A pause. I promise that as soon as you return, we'll have a thorough conversation about our zero-tolerance policies. This will never happen again. Jordan's lips curved into a small, appreciative smile. I trust you, Laura. Thank you, and I'm sorry you had to get dragged into it so suddenly. Don't worry about it, she said firmly. I stand by you. We'll handle this together. Jordan ended the call, feeling a measure of relief. Laura had been an ally from the early stages of his involvement with Horizon Aero. She understood how important it was to build an inclusive and professional company culture. Still, the emotional toll pressed on him. Why do these moments still persist? It was 2025, and yet, here he was, still having to prove his legitimacy in spaces where he had already earned his place. His mind drifted to the thousands of employees under Horizon Aero's banner, many of whom had likely faced similar biases in their own careers. Jordan silently pledged that he would fight for them in the boardroom as fiercely as he did on the tarmac. Before long, Captain Mark Sims arrived. Stepping aboard in a crisp uniform, he was a middle-aged man with salt-and-pepper hair and a measured, respectful demeanor. He extended a firm handshake. Mr. Gaines, it's an honor to fly you today. There was a knowing glint in his eye. Clearly, he had already heard about the incident. I heard there was some complication. Sorry about that. Jordan shook his hand, appreciating the pilot's professionalism. Thank you for stepping in on such short notice, Captain Sims. Let's make this a smooth flight. Absolutely. I'll head to the cockpit and finalize the pre-flight checks with the crew. If you need anything, just let me know. As Sims departed, Emily and another flight attendant moved through the cabin, making the final preparations. Jordan harnessed himself into his seat, preparing for pushback. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the steady hum of the engine soothe him. His mind shifted forward, focusing on what was next. The upcoming meetings in New York. Discussions about expansion routes, potential alliances, and the unveiling of a new corporate branding strategy, one that reflected his vision for inclusivity and excellence. The plane finally taxied onto the runway. As it gained speed and lifted into the sky, Jordan felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. Triumph, because he had stood his ground against blatant discrimination. Sadness, because such battles were necessary at all. He gazed out the window, watching the airport grow smaller below. For a moment, his reflection in the glass stared back at him. This wasn't just about him. It was about every employee, every passenger, and every future leader who needed to see that prejudice would not be tolerated. 30,000 feet above the world, the seatbelt sign switched off. Emily returned, placing a tray of refreshments in front of him. Whitmore sat across from Jordan, flipping through some documents. We have a working flight ahead of us, he said with a half smile. Time to refine our pitch for the investors. Jordan nodded, straightening. Life carried on. Deadlines didn't shift because of personal struggles, but now there was something more than just business driving him forward. There was purpose. And he was ready. As the Gulfstream G650 glided smoothly through the skies, Jordan Gaines reclined in his seat, gazing out the window. Below, the world stretched endlessly, a vast horizon of new beginnings, but his mind wasn't on the view. It was on Captain Grayson. Jordan knew that life had just changed for the disgraced pilot. Karma came in many forms: lost opportunities, public disgrace, or humbling experiences that forced people to confront their biases. Grayson's punishment would be far-reaching, and his downfall might serve as a warning to others in the company who harbored similar prejudices. But Jordan's focus wasn't on revenge. It was on progress. He had come too far to let ignorance dictate his path, and as the jet soared toward New York, he knew. This was just the beginning. The private car pulled up to the Lexington Grand, a towering hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Even amidst the steel and glass giants of the city, the hotel stood out, exuding old-world elegance blended with modern flair. Jordan stepped out onto the curb, inhaling the crisp city air. The sounds of honking taxis and hurried footsteps filled the air, the pulse of the metropolis running through his veins. They were behind schedule, thanks to the ordeal in Atlanta. But Laura Mendelsohn had already reached out to the board members and investors, explaining the situation. Most were understanding, though Jordan was sure some eyebrows had been raised. Inside, the hotel's grand lobby gleamed with gilded railings, marble floors, and cascading chandeliers. Jordan and Daniel Whitmore moved swiftly, passing through the lavish space into a private conference room. A small group of executives and investors sat waiting. Jordan entered the room with ease, his presence commanding attention. "Apologies for the delay, everyone," he said smoothly. There were unexpected complications at the airport. The group, a mix of legal advisors, potential investors, and a few Horizon Aero board members, murmured polite greetings. Some of them already knew Jordan from previous meetings. But for the rest, this was their first time seeing him, not as a consultant, but as the new majority shareholder. Taking his seat at the head of the long mahogany table, Jordan wasted no time addressing the elephant in the room. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge today's incident at Monroe International," he said. "Some of you may have heard rumors or seen social media posts." A few board members exchanged glances. "There was an unfortunate altercation with a pilot who failed to recognize my credentials. I am handling the situation directly with Laura Mendelson and our HR team." He paused, reading the room. Corporate boards hated negative publicity, and social media had been ablaze with footage of the confrontation. He needed to show them he was in control. "Let me be clear," Jordan continued, his voice unwavering. "Horizon Aero has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. I am fully committed to ensuring this company stands for excellence and respect at all levels." A wave of murmurs and nods rippled through the group. Then an older investor, a silver-haired gentleman in a bespoke suit, raised his hand. "Glad to hear it," he said, "but let's talk about what really matters, the business. The airline industry is competitive, and we want to see real momentum. What's your near-term expansion plan?" Jordan flashed a confident smile. "Let's dive into it." With a nod, he signaled Whitmore, who pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on the large screen. Charts, graphs, and bullet points appeared, detailing new route expansions, target demographics, strategic partnerships. Despite the long day, Jordan spoke with clarity and conviction. This wasn't just a business pitch, it was his vision. He outlined how Horizon Aero would stand out from larger airlines by offering specialized routes, top-tier in-flight experiences, eco-friendly initiatives. He didn't just talk about diversity as a corporate buzzword. He framed it as a business strategy. A workforce that reflected a global community would better serve a global clientele. The board members listened intently, asking questions about cost projections, logistics, and profitability timelines. Jordan fielded each question with poise, while Whitmore backed him up with detailed financial data. Halfway through the presentation, an existing board member, Dr. Lorraine West, spoke up. Her tone was measured, but direct. "Jordan, I have to ask, what about the pilot incident? Are there any concerns about lawsuits or negative press?" Jordan's jaw tightened slightly at the memory of the humiliating standoff on the tarmac. But he kept his expression neutral. "We'll be transparent and decisive," he assured her. "If we handle this ethically, it won't tarnish our brand. It will reinforce our values." Dr. West nodded thoughtfully, though Jordan sensed some lingering caution in her gaze. Then, another board member leaned forward, tapping a pen against the table. "In a world where everything can go viral," he said, "how do we mitigate social media backlash?" Jordan steepled his fingers, leaning slightly forward. "By owning our actions." He let the words settle before continuing. "We won't shy away from accountability. We will publicly reaffirm our commitment to fair treatment while also demonstrating that we take misconduct seriously. Social media can amplify negativity, but it can also amplify the good. If we do the right thing, that's what will be remembered." A few board members exchanged looks, nodding in agreement. Jordan knew they weren't just worried about this incident. They were worried about his leadership. Could he steer Horizon Aero into a profitable future without letting his mission for equality disrupt the company's bottom line? Jordan was ready to prove that he could. Jordan Gaines leaned forward, steepling his fingers as he addressed the final question from the board. "We mitigate social media backlash by owning our actions," he said, his voice even and composed. "We condemn bigotry openly, reaffirm our commitment to fairness, and show that we've taken immediate steps to correct misconduct. Social media can amplify negativity, but it can also amplify progress. If we do the right thing, people will remember that. A few nods of approval spread around the room. The board members, satisfied for now, shifted their focus back to the expansion plan. As the hours rolled on, dinner was served. A spread of gourmet dishes, carefully arranged across the long mahogany table. Jordan, however, had little appetite. After the day's turmoil, he could barely stomach more than a few bites. Meanwhile, Daniel Whitmore took over certain sections of the presentation, allowing Jordan time to sip water and clear his thoughts. By the time they wrapped up, the mood in the room was cautiously optimistic. Several potential investors shook Jordan's hand, impressed by his clarity of vision. A few had follow-up questions requesting more granular financial data, but there were no outright objections. Jordan felt a wave of relief. If these talks translated into commitments, it would mean crucial funding and partnerships for Horizon Aero's next chapter. As the group dispersed, Dr. Lorraine West lingered. She approached Jordan, speaking in a low, serious tone. "I want you to know I support your mission," she said. "But I also know how ugly corporate battles can get. Watch your flank, Jordan. There are people in this industry who won't be too keen on your ownership." Jordan gave her a grateful smile. "I appreciate the heads up, Dr. West." He exhaled, his expression darkening slightly. "If today taught me anything, it's that we can't assume everyone shares our values. But that won't stop me from pushing forward." She nodded sharply before slipping away, leaving Jordan alone with Whitmore in the now empty conference room. The glow of Manhattan's skyline filtered in through the tall windows. At last, Jordan could breathe. He slumped into a chair, exhaustion pressing down on him. "You did great," Whitmore said, gathering up the last of the documents. "They liked your plan." Jordan gave a tired nod. "Thanks. Let's just hope it translates into real commitments." He gazed out the window, watching the city that never sleeps. The day had started with a humiliating confrontation on a tarmac and ended with a successful board meeting. It had been a whirlwind. But in many ways, that was the nature of corporate leadership, a constant dance between crisis and opportunity. He only hoped he could steer this company through stormy skies without losing sight of what mattered: equality, integrity, innovation. Because at the end of the day, Jordan had a lot riding on this: his reputation, his investments, and most importantly, the trust of those who saw him as a trailblazer. The next morning, social media was on fire. Every platform, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, was ablaze with hashtags related to the Monroe International fiasco. Clips of Captain Grayson shouting at Jordan had circulated widely, showing his disrespect, his arrogance, his downfall. The footage varied in length, but every version captured the pilot's hostility, the moment of revelation that Jordan was the airline's owner, the stunned silence that followed. There was no shortage of headlines: racist pilot learns shocking truth, corporate jet drama, airline owner kicked off his own plane, powerful confrontation on the tarmac, caught on camera. Ironically, while some coverage was negative, the majority of online users rallied behind Jordan. Among the thousands of comments, a few stood out. "Talk about karma, that pilot messed with the wrong guy. So proud to see a black man owning an airline. This is how we break barriers. Proof that class and composure can defeat ignorance." Jordan awoke in his penthouse suite, his phone vibrating with an endless stream of notifications. He scrolled through them, half dreading what he might see. And yet, he found himself heartened. Sure, there were pockets of hateful remarks, but the overwhelming majority of responses were supportive. It was a reminder that times were changing, albeit not fast enough. By mid-morning, Jordan had a meeting scheduled at Horizon Aero's local Manhattan office, just a small liaison branch. There, he joined a video call with Laura Mendelsohn, Margaret Henshaw, the head of HR Thwing. They wasted no time addressing the fallout from Captain Grayson. "Jordan," Laura began, appearing on a wall-mounted screen, "we've initiated a formal inquiry into Grayson's conduct. Employee testimonies, security footage, and of course, social media videos. HR will handle the official discipline, which could lead to termination." Jordan nodded at the camera. "Thank you, Laura. Let me know if you need a statement from me." Margaret, the HR chief, cleared her throat. "He's been with us for 8 years, she noted. "But that won't shield him from consequences. We also discovered prior complaints about unprofessional behavior, though nothing quite this severe. This might be his final strike. Jordan exhaled slowly, his mind flashing back to the confrontation. The anger in Grayson's voice, the prejudice in his words, the way he had refused to back down, even when faced with the truth. Jordan didn't enjoy seeing someone lose their career, but some lines could not be crossed without repercussions. "I trust HR to handle this fairly," he said finally. "Keep me in the loop." Laura gave a firm nod. "We will." Even as Captain Grayson faded from Horizon Aero's ranks, Jordan Gaines couldn't ignore a pang of regret. He didn't take pleasure in seeing someone lose their job, but some lines simply could not be crossed without consequences. Jordan turned to Daniel Whitmore, who sat across from him in the quiet of the Manhattan office. "We have to set a precedent, Daniel. Horizon Aero must never tolerate bigotry, and that message needs to be clear at every level." Whitmore nodded firmly. "Agreed. But we can't just react. We need to be proactive. Maybe roll out new sensitivity training programs. The spotlight is on us now." They spent the next hour mapping out a plan. Mandatory diversity and inclusion workshops for all employees, a renewed hotline for reporting discrimination, an internal memo from Jordan reaffirming the airline's core values. It felt like both crisis management and a real opportunity to reshape Horizon Aero for the better. Yet, outside their circle, the rumors were growing. While Jordan and his team focused on real solutions, the internet had other ideas. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. The whole thing was staged for publicity, some claimed. Captain Grayson was a scapegoat, others argued. Certain corners of social media and tabloid news thrived on twisting the event into something larger than it was. Jordan tried not to get sucked in. He knew that public attention was fickle. Today's controversy would soon be replaced by another. Still, he couldn't ignore the frustration bubbling beneath his skin. Later that afternoon, Jordan's phone buzzed with a text from Laura Mendelsohn. "Heads up, Grayson is giving an interview to a local tabloid. Might be an attempt to salvage his reputation. Brace yourself." Jordan's jaw clenched. Of course, the disgraced pilot was trying to rewrite the story. Jordan could already imagine the excuses. "I wasn't properly informed. I was just following protocol. Upper management failed to brief me." And sure enough, a few hours later, an article surfaced online. Headline: "Former pilot speaks out, claims he was just doing his job." In the interview, Captain Grayson framed himself as a victim of miscommunication. "I wasn't told who the passenger was. I had no intention of being discriminatory. I was only following security measures." He conveniently left out his hostility toward Jordan, his repeated refusal to verify Jordan's credentials, the racial undertones of his words. The article was a mess of half-truths and deflections, but Jordan refused to be baited into a PR war. Instead, he released a simple, carefully worded statement through Horizon Aero's media team. "Horizon Aero does not condone discrimination in any form. The safety and respect of our passengers and staff are paramount. We are conducting a thorough internal review of the recent incident. We appreciate the public support and remain committed to fostering an inclusive environment." No direct mention of Grayson. No counterattacks, just a firm reiteration of company values. Some might call it bland corporate speak, but Jordan knew. Calm reassurance, not sensationalism, was the way forward. The rumors would settle. The real work, changing the company's culture, was just beginning. Jordan stared out the office window, the Manhattan skyline glittering under the evening lights. Each tower represented someone's ambition. His, however, was not about personal glory. It was about building something bigger. An airline that stood for respect, a company known for efficiency and equality, a culture where every employee and passenger felt valued. If he had to weather storms of scandal to achieve that, so be it. Jordan sat in his spacious corner office at Horizon Aero's Atlanta headquarters. The room still carried traces of its previous occupant, the old CEO. But new touches, abstract artwork representing unity and collaboration, hinted at Jordan's emerging vision. Through the large windows, he watched the runways below. Planes bearing the Horizon Aero logo taxied, prepared for takeoff. Each aircraft felt like a piece of his dream taking flight. Across from him, Laura Mendelsohn reviewed a document, the final decision on Captain Grayson. After a formal HR hearing, the verdict was in. Grayson had been terminated. Margaret Henshaw, the head of HR, had confirmed multiple past complaints of unprofessional behavior. Though severe, his meltdown on the tarmac wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the tipping point. Laura set down the report. "I really think we handled this responsibly," she said. "The last thing we needed was a drawn-out legal battle, but he left us no choice." Jordan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I don't revel in firing anyone," he admitted, "but the message has to be clear. This is not acceptable here. We can't compromise on that." Laura nodded. "Agreed. Now let's move forward." And Jordan knew she was right. The fight wasn't just about removing one problematic pilot. It was about reshaping an entire company, one step at a time. Jordan Gaines sat in his office, the Atlanta headquarters of Horizon Aero buzzing with activity outside his door. Across from him, Laura Mendelson tapped her stylus against a tablet. "So, should we finalize the new pilot orientation and cultural sensitivity training?" she asked. Jordan nodded. "Yes, and expand it beyond just new hires. I want every employee, from top executives to the cleaning crew, to take part. Everyone should feel safe reporting concerns." Laura smiled approvingly. "Understood. I'll coordinate with HR to make it happen." With that, they pivoted to more upbeat topics. A potential collaboration with an international luxury lounge service, improvements to in-flight Wi-Fi, the upcoming unveiling of new uniform designs. The goal was clear. Align everyone under the banner of innovation and inclusivity. After the meeting, Jordan roamed the hallways, taking time to connect with employees. He chatted with mechanics in the hangar. He listened to flight attendants discuss safety protocols. He even stepped into the dispatch office to observe flight scheduling. The more he integrated himself with the workforce, the more his presence became a source of motivation. Employees were thrilled to see a leader who genuinely cared. As Jordan made his rounds, a familiar voice spoke shyly from behind him. "Mr. Gaines?" Jordan turned to see Emily Lawson, the young flight attendant who had bravely spoken up during the tarmac confrontation. She clutched her clipboard tightly, a trace of nervousness in her expression. "Thank you for what you did," she said, her voice tinged with gratitude. "I know it must have been tough." Jordan recalled her trembling voice that day, how she had tried to defend him despite Captain Grayson's intimidation. He offered her a warm smile. "Thank you for your bravery, Emily. You risked a lot by contradicting the pilot, but it made a huge difference. Don't think I've forgotten it." Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she lowered her gaze. "I just did what was right." Jordan nodded. "Which is exactly the kind of employee we value here. Keep it up." She beamed, her confidence growing as she turned back to her duties. Jordan continued walking, exchanging greetings with other staff members. The fractured atmosphere of that tense day on the runway had shifted. The weight of Captain Grayson's negativity had lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of unity. But not all corners of the company were so welcoming. As Jordan passed a vending machine, a small group of managers in suits stood huddled in whispered conversation. The moment they noticed him, their chatter abruptly ceased. Jordan caught the guarded expressions, the wary glances. He recognized the look. These were loyalists to the previous leadership, people who resented change and saw him as a disruption to the old order. They nodded politely, but their tight smiles betrayed their discomfort. Jordan didn't expect everyone to welcome him with open arms. Corporate shifts always created winners and losers, defenders of the status quo and champions of transformation. He walked on, undeterred. If the tarmac fiasco had taught him anything, it was this. Change will always be resisted. Bias often lurks in the shadows. Sabotage can be quiet, but no less dangerous. His core team, Laura, Whitmore, and a handful of forward-thinking executives, would be his pillars in the battles ahead. That evening, after hours of meetings, Jordan finally settled into his office, quietly reviewing financial projections. A knock at the door interrupted him. Dr. Lorraine West stood in the doorway, the board member who had warned him in Manhattan about corporate opposition. She gave him a tight-lipped smile as he gestured for her to enter. "I was passing through Atlanta," she said, settling into a chair. "Thought I'd drop by. See how you're settling in." Jordan leaned back, studying her carefully. "And?" She folded her arms. "Word around the board is that you're taking swift action to stamp out discrimination. Good, but some folks are whispering that you're overreaching, making enemies in the process." Jordan exhaled slowly. Anyone specific? Or just rumors? She shrugged. Both. You know, the old CEO had his inner circle. Some of them aren't thrilled to see a new majority owner, especially one pushing culture change they never bothered with. She held his gaze. I just want to make sure you're prepared for pushback. Jordan appreciated her directness. I won't let fear stop me from doing what's right, but I'm not naive. Change is never smooth. I'll keep an eye out. Dr. West nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good, just watch your back. She stood, adjusting her blazer. Sometimes the real battles aren't fought on the tarmac. They're fought in conference rooms, with pen strokes and sabotage. Her expression softened slightly. Keep building allies, Jordan. You're going to need them. With that, she gave a polite nod and left. Jordan stared after her, her words echoing in his mind. The incident with Captain Grayson had been loud, ugly, and public. But the next battles? They would be quieter. They would be strategic. They would come from within his own ranks. Not everyone wanted him to succeed. Some saw him as a disruptor. Others saw him as a threat. But this was his airline now. Jordan closed his laptop and turned to the large windows overlooking the runway. Outside, planes moved with precision, their paths carefully orchestrated. Each aircraft carried passengers, employees, and countless untold stories. Horizon Aero was no longer just a business to him. It was a responsibility, a legacy in the making, and he would guide it with integrity, no matter the storms ahead. High above the Atlanta skyline, the Horizon Aero board gathered for a critical quarterly meeting. It was the first major convening since Jordan Gaines' ownership became public, and since the infamous tarmac incident that had made headlines. Tension hummed beneath the polite formalities. At the podium, Laura Mendelsohn walked the board through key updates. Passenger satisfaction scores were rising. Operational efficiency had improved. West Coast expansion was exceeding expectations, with a 15% increase in bookings and strong business class uptake. Polite applause followed, but Jordan could sense the discord beneath it. On his right, a cluster of board members exchanged subtle glances. From across the room, Dr. Eleanor Blake also noticed, her lips pressing into a thin line. After Laura concluded her update, a hand rose from the far end of the table. Charles Winslow, a longtime ally of the previous CEO and a vocal critic of Jordan's leadership. His voice dripped with skepticism as he spoke. Ms. Mendelsohn, can you explain the rationale behind increasing our training budget by 20%? He flipped through his reports, feigning concern. We're supposed to be a lean airline, and that's one of the biggest new expenses. Laura cleared her throat. Certainly, Mr. Winslow. She cast a brief glance at Jordan before continuing. The increase accounts for mandatory training on inclusion, customer service, and advanced safety drills. Our new leadership, she nodded toward Jordan, believes strongly in a workforce that is both well-trained and culturally aware. Winslow's brow furrowed. And how exactly does that translate to profits? He leaned back, challenging. Aren't we risking short-term losses for intangible cultural gains? Jordan folded his hands calmly, then leaned forward. I'll take that question, Charles. Winslow's gaze flicked to him. Jordan kept his tone steady. Investing in our staff isn't about feel-good initiatives. When employees feel respected and prepared, customer satisfaction rises. When customer satisfaction rises, brand loyalty strengthens. Stronger loyalty leads to repeat business, higher retention, and increased profitability. A hush fell over the room. Winslow narrowed his eyes. I'm just saying, we don't want to throw millions into coddling employees if it doesn't help the bottom line. This is an airline, not a social experiment. The undercurrent was clear. There were board members who saw Jordan's leadership as a necessary evolution. And there were those, like Winslow, who viewed it as a costly distraction. Jordan held his ground. Culture is part of our product. Customers don't just pick airlines based on ticket prices, they pick based on experiences. A well-trained, inclusive workforce fosters loyalty. That loyalty will drive long-term revenue and brand growth. A few board members nodded in agreement. Even Laura shot him a subtle look of approval. But Winslow simply flicked through his notes. We'll see. And with that, he moved on. The next agenda items passed smoothly, until the board reached a heated topic. Brand ambassadors. Laura presented a slate of potential public figures, a mix of travel influencers, lifestyle personalities, diverse cultural figures. The goal? to ensure Horizon Aero's image reflected its values. But then, Sylvia Morton, a sharp-eyed board member, spoke up. "I'm concerned we're focusing too much on diversity for diversity's sake." Her tone was measured, but the implication was clear. "Shouldn't we just pick the biggest names for maximum exposure? Why limit ourselves?" Jordan breathed evenly. This was not hostility. This was corporate skepticism, and he needed to address it logically, not emotionally. Fame is one factor, yes, but alignment with our brand values is just as important. He glanced around the room. "We don't just want big names. We want ambassadors who genuinely believe in inclusive travel. That authenticity builds stronger brand loyalty than just another celebrity endorsement." Dr. Eleanor Blake nodded in agreement. Long-term brand affinity is built through authenticity, not just star power. Sylvia flipped her pen between her fingers, unconvinced. "Well, I suppose we'll see how that pays off in the next quarter or two." Her tone was pointed. "Just remember, we're not running a charity, we're running an airline." The tension was undeniable. Certain board members weren't blatantly resistant, but they saw Jordan's culture-first strategy as a financial risk. They wanted immediate returns, ignoring the long-term brand equity that came from building a respected, forward-thinking airline. Despite the friction, Jordan had prepared extensively. He had data, he had projections. By the end of the discussion, he had secured a majority vote for the new brand ambassador strategy, expanded training initiatives. It was a victory, but a narrow one. After the meeting, as the other board members filed out, Dr. Blake lingered. She approached Jordan, speaking in a low voice. "You handled that well." Then she paused. "But you can see it, can't you?" Jordan nodded. She sighed. "Some of them are just biding their time." Jordan folded his arms. "You think they'll try to undermine me?" Blake met his gaze. "Not openly, not yet, but they're watching, waiting for a moment of weakness." Jordan exhaled. He had expected resistance, but this was calculated opposition, and it wouldn't be fought with loud confrontations, but with subtle boardroom maneuvers. Jordan thanked her. He knew that while the incident with Captain Grayson had been dramatic, these quiet corporate battles, they were the real war. But he had one key advantage. He had the controlling share. He had the majority vote. For now, and as long as he maintained support, his vision for Horizon Aero would move forward. As he stepped out of the conference room, a wave of determination settled in his chest. Let them grumble. Let them doubt me. They have no idea what's coming. That night, Jordan Gaines stood in his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, a steaming cup of tea in hand. His phone buzzed with messages. Employees reaching out to thank him for championing change at Horizon Aero. A mechanic wrote about the new mentorship program helping young technicians. A flight attendant praised the professional development workshops. These small messages of gratitude reminded Jordan that, despite the resistance from certain board members, the majority of the workforce stood with him. In the distance, planes crisscrossed the night sky, their contrails glowing softly under the city lights. Jordan smiled. He was forging a new path for himself and for the airline. And no matter how turbulent the journey, he fully intended to stay the course. 2 months later, the final chapter of Captain Edward Grayson's downfall unfolded. A local news station reported that Grayson had been unable to secure a position at any major airline. His outburst on the tarmac, now a viral video, had followed him. His once prestigious career had been tarnished. Some rumored that he had been forced to take freelance gigs at small flight schools, far removed from the elite commercial aviation world he once thrived in. For a man who had prided himself on his authority, the fall had been swift and unforgiving. It was a harsh lesson. Prejudice had cost him everything. Under Jordan's leadership, the airline thrived. Respect and innovation became the foundation of the company. Customer feedback soared, praising the airline's service and inclusivity. A signature campaign, Horizon Together, was launched, highlighting inspiring stories from employees and passengers. The public relations turnaround was remarkable. Even investors who had once wavered began to see how Horizon Aero's improved reputation translated into stronger ticket sales and strategic partnerships. New international routes opened. The West Coast expansion succeeded beyond expectations. Talks of launching new routes in South America and Europe gained momentum. Even some skeptical board members like Charles Winslow, who once questioned Jordan's approach, began to acknowledge the results. The financial benefits of a positive work culture were becoming undeniable. One sunny afternoon, Jordan stood behind a podium at Horizon Aero's newly built training center. The press was in attendance. Employees from every level of the company had gathered. Flight crew, mechanics, administrators, marketing teams, even newly hired pilots. The energy in the room was electric. Just months ago, the airline had been embroiled in scandal. Now, the newly constructed training center stood as a symbol of growth, learning, and transformation. Dr. Eleanor Blake took the stage first, introducing Jordan with genuine admiration. Then Jordan stepped forward. He scanned the crowd. Among them were longtime employees who had witnessed multiple leadership changes. Some skeptical, some hopeful. Jordan took a deep breath and began. "Good afternoon, everyone." His voice carried across the auditorium, steady and strong. "Today, we celebrate a new chapter for Horizon Aero." He gestured to the state-of-the-art facility. "This training center represents our investment in you, the backbone of this airline, because no matter how advanced our planes get, it's the people who truly make the difference." A soft wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes lit up the stage. Jordan continued. "A few months ago," he said, "I had a very public confrontation with someone who doubted my identity and my authority." Murmurs spread through the audience. Everyone knew the story. Many of you witnessed it, read about it, or heard the rumors. Jordan paused. "I won't rehash the details. What matters is what we learned." His gaze hardened with conviction. Respect is non-negotiable. Ignorance and bigotry have no place in the skies or on the ground. This time, the applause was louder. Jordan let it settle before continuing. "We've introduced new training programs, expanded opportunities for professional growth, strengthened our commitment to diversity." He glanced at a few employees in the crowd, recognizing faces of those who had personally benefited from these changes. And you know what? Jordan let the moment hang. The results speak for themselves. Happier staff, growing customer loyalty, stronger financial returns. This is what happens when we put our values into action. The energy in the room shifted. This was no longer just a corporate speech. This was a movement. As the applause erupted again, Jordan knew this was only the beginning. He had weathered the storm. He had proven that change wasn't just possible, but profitable. And he had solidified his place as the leader Horizon Aero needed. But the battle wasn't over. There were still forces within the company who resented his leadership, some who waited for him to stumble. Yet, as Jordan looked out at the faces before him, he felt one thing above all else: unshakable determination. This was no longer just about his own success. It was about reshaping an entire industry. Horizon Aero will not just be another airline, he vowed internally. It will be a symbol of progress. The camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing a defining moment for Horizon Aero. Jordan Gaines stood at the podium, a confident smile on his face. The training center was officially inaugurated. The employees who had been skeptical now stood united behind him. The headlines were rewriting the airline's narrative. As Jordan stepped forward, Laura Mendelsohn, Emily Lawson, and other key team members joined him. A red ribbon stretched before them. With a single cut, they ushered in a new chapter for the airline. Flash. The cameras captured the moment. Horizon Aero opens landmark training center under visionary owner Jordan Gaines. Diversity and innovation drive airline's new growth strategy. The negativity of the past was overshadowed. The pilot who once tried to throw him off his own plane was now nothing more than a forgotten name in a viral video. Jordan breathed deeply. This was bigger than him. This was about every employee who had ever felt overlooked. Every passenger who deserved a better, more inclusive travel experience. This was about reshaping an industry. The applause thundered. The sun beamed over the tarmac. Horizon Aero was rising. A single moment on the runway had transformed an airline's future. A fiery confrontation fueled by prejudice had become a catalyst for progress. Jordan Gaines had not only claimed his rightful place, he had built something greater. A culture of respect. An airline that valued every employee and passenger. A company that soared above ignorance.